House music is a genre of electronic dance music that originated in Chicago in the early 1980s. It was initially popularized circa 1984 in Chicago, but beginning in 1985, it fanned out to other major cities across North and South America, as well as Europe and later Australia. Early house music commercial success in Europe saw songs such as Pump Up the Volume by MARS, House Nation by House Master Boyz and The Rude Boy of House, Theme from Sexpress by Sexpress and Doctorin the House by Coldcut in the pop charts. Since the early to mid-1990s, house music has been infused in mainstream pop and dance music worldwide. Early house music was generally dance-based music characterized by repetitive 4/4 beats, rhythms mainly provided by drum machines, offbeat hi-hat cymbals, and synthesized basslines. While house displayed several characteristics similar to disco music, it was more electronic and minimalistic, and the repetitive rhythm of house was more important than the song itself. House music today, while keeping several of these core elements, notably the prominent kick drum on every beat, varies a lot in style and influence, ranging from the soulful and atmospheric deep house to the more minimalistic microhouse. House music has also fused with several other genres, creating fusion subgenres, such as Euro house, tech house, electro house and jump house. In the late 1980s, many local Chicago house music artists suddenly found themselves with major label deals. House music proved to be a commercially successful genre and a more mainstream pop-based variation grew increasingly popular. Artists and groups such as Madonna, Janet Jackson, Paragraph RK, Aretha Franklin, Steps, Daft Punk, and C+C Music Factory incorporated the genre into their work. After enjoying significant success in the early to mid-90s, house music grew even larger during the second wave of progressive house. The genre has remained popular and fused into other popular subgenres, as the DJ Mag Top 100 DJs poll has been dominated by house DJs since the beginning of the polls. Today, house music remains popular in both clubs and in the mainstream pop scene while retaining a strong foothold on underground scenes across the globe. Influences and precursors: various disco songs incorporated sounds produced with synthesizers and drum machines, and other various compositions were entirely electronic. Examples include Giorgio Moroder's late 1970s productions such as Donna Summer's hit single I Feel Love from 1977, Sarah and Supernature, Yellow Magic Orchestra's synth disco pop productions from their self-titled album, Solid State Survivor, and several early 1980s disco pop productions by the high-energy group Lime. Soul and disco influenced house music, plus mixing and editing techniques earlier explored by disco, garage music and post-disco DJs, producers, and audio engineers like M&M Music, Walter Gibbons, Tom Moulton, Jim Burgess, Larry Levin, Ron Hardy, M&M, and others who produced longer, more repetitive, and percussive arrangements of existing disco recordings. Early house producers like Frankie Knuckles created similar compositions from scratch, using samplers, synthesizers, sequencers, and drum machines. The electronic instrumentation and minimal arrangement of synthesizing 10 ragas to a disco beat, an album of Indian ragas performed in a disco style, anticipated the sounds of acid house music, but it is not known to have had any influence on the genre prior to the album's rediscovery in the 21st century. Rachel Kane, co-founder of an influential Trax Records, was previously involved in the burgeoning punk scene and cites industrial and post-punk record store Wax Trax Records is an important connection between the ever-changing underground sounds of Chicago. Impacting Chicago, the seminal work published in this period was a self-titled album called Liaisons Dangereuses by an eponymous synth-punk and industrial music group from Darwin-Quartersdorf, West Germany. The no-wave music from New York acts Liquid and ESG also displayed a share of influence there among the pioneers. As most proto-house DJs were primarily stuck to playing their conventional ensemble of Philadelphia disco records, Frankie Knuckles and Ron Hardy, two influential pioneers of house music, were known for their out-of-bounds behavior. The former, credited as the godfather of house, worked primarily with early disco music with just a hint of new and different music but still enjoying a variety of music, while the latter produced unconventional DIY mixed-ups which he later played straight on in the music club Music Box, boiling with raw energy. Marshall Jefferson, who would later reappear with the Chicago house milestone piece Move Your Body, got involved in house music after hearing Ron Hardy's music in Music Box. Origins, Chicago House. In the early 1980s, Chicago radio jocks the Hot Mix 5, and club DJs Ron Hardy and Frankie Knuckles played various styles of dance music, including older disco records, newer Italo disco, and electro-funk tracks, b-boy hip-hop music by Man Parrish, Jelly Bean Benitez, Arthur Baker and John Roby, as well as electronic pop music by Kraftwerk and Yellow Magic Orchestra. Some made and played their own edits of their favorite songs on reel-to-reel tape, and sometimes mixed in effects, drum machines, and other rhythmic electronic instrumentation. In this era, the hypnotic electronic dance song On and On, produced in 1984 by Chicago DJ Jesse Saunders and co-written by Vince Lawrence, had elements that became staples of the early house sound, such as the Roland TB-303 bass synthesizer and minimal vocals, as well as a Roland drum machine and Korg synthesizer. It also utilized the bassline from Player One's disco record Space Invaders. On and On is sometimes cited as the first house record, though other examples from around that time, such as J.M. Silk's Music is the Key, have also been cited. Starting in 1984, some of these DJs, inspired by Jesse Saunders' success with On and On, tried their hand at producing and releasing original compositions. These compositions used newly affordable electronic instruments to emulate not just Saunders' song, but the edited, enhanced styles of disco and other dance music they already favored. These homegrown productions were played on Chicago area radio and in local Discover QUES, catering mainly to African American and gay audiences. By 1985, although the exact origins of the term are debated, house music encompassed these locally produced recordings. Subgenres of house, including deep house and acid house, quickly emerged and gained traction. Deep house's origins can be traced to Chicago producer Mr. Fingus's relatively jazzy, soulful recordings Mystery of Love, and Can You Feel It? According to author Richie Unterberger, it moved house music away from its post-human tendencies back towards the lush soulful sound of early disco music. Acid house arose from Chicago artists' experiments with the squelchy Roland TB-303 bass synthesizer, and the style's origins on vinyl is generally cited as Future's acid tracks. Future, a group founded by Nathan DJ Pierre Jones, Earl Spanky Smith Jr., and Herbert Herb J. Jackson, is credited with having been the first to use the TB-303 in the house music context. The group's 12-minute acid tracks was recorded to tape and was played by DJ Ron Hardy at the Music Box, where Hardy was resident DJ. Hardy once played it 4 times over the course of an evening until the crowd responded favorably. The track also utilized a Roland Trail 707 drum machine. Club play from pioneering Chicago DJs like Ron Hardy and Lil Louie, local dance music record shops such as Imports, State Street Records, Loop Records, Gramophone Records and the popular Hot Mix 5 shows on radio station WBMX-FM helped popularize house music in Chicago and among visiting DJs and producers from Detroit. Trax Records and DJ International Records, Chicago labels with wider distribution, helped popularize house music inside and outside of Chicago. One 1986 house tune called Move Your Body by Marshall Jefferson, taken from the appropriately titled The House Music Anthem EP, became a big hit in Chicago and eventually worldwide. By 1986, UK labels were releasing house music by Chicago acts, and by 1987 house tracks by Chicago DJs and producers were appearing on and even topping the UK music chart. Origins of the term house music is thought to have originated as a reference to a Chicago nightclub called The Warehouse, which existed from 1977 to 1983. Patrons of The Warehouse were primarily Black and Latino, who came to dance to music played by the club's resident DJ Frankie Knuckles, whom fans refer to as the Godfather of House. After the Warehouse closed in 1983, the crowds went to Knuckles' new club, the Power Plant. In the Channel 4 documentary Pump Up the Volume, Knuckles remarks that the first time he heard the term house music was upon seeing "We play house music" on a sign in the window of a bar on Chicago's South Side. One of the people in the car with him joked, "You know, that's the kind of music you play down at the Warehouse." And then everybody laughed. Southside Chicago DJ Leonard Remix Roy, in self-published statements, claims he put such a sign in a tavern window because it was where he played music that one might find in one's home. In his case, it referred to his mother's soul and disco records, which he worked into his sets. Farley Jack Master Funk was quoted as saying in 1982, "I was jing at a club called The Playground and there was this kid named Leonard Remix Roy who was a DJ at a rival club called The Rink. He came over to my club one night, and into the DJ booth and said to me, 'I've got the gimmick that's gonna take all the people out of your club and into mine, it's called house music.' Now, where he got that name from or what made him think of it I don't know, so the answer lies with him." Chippy's 1985 recording It's House may also have helped to define this new form of electronic music. However, Chippy himself lends credence to the Knuckles association, claiming the name came from methods of labeling records at the Imports Etc. record store, where he worked in the early 1980s. Bins of music that DJ Knuckles played at the Warehouse nightclub were labeled in the store as Heard at the Warehouse, which was shortened to simply House. Patrons later asked for new music for the bins, which Chippy implies was a demand the shop tried to meet by stocking newer local club hits. In a 1986 interview, Rocky Jones, the former club DJ who ran the DJ International record label, doesn't mention Imports Etc., Frankie Knuckles, or the Warehouse by name, but agrees that house was a regional catch-all term for dance music, and that it was once synonymous with older disco music. Larry Heard, a.k.a. Mr. Fingers, claims that the term house became popular due to many of the early DJs creating music in their own homes using synthesizers and drum machines such as the Roland Trail 808, TR-909, and the TB-303. These synthesizers were used to create a house subgenre called acid house. Juan Atkins, an originator of Detroit techno music, claims the term house reflected the exclusive association of particular tracks with particular clubs and DJs. Those records helped differentiate the clubs and DJs, and thus were considered to be their house records. In an effort to maintain such exclusives, the DJs were inspired to create their own house records. Lyrical themes, house also had an influence of relaying political messages to people who were considered to be outcasts of society. The music appealed to those who didn't fit into mainstream American society and was especially celebrated by many black males. Frankie Knuckles once said that the Warehouse Club in Chicago was like church for people who have fallen from grace. The House producer Marshall Jefferson compared it to old-time religion in the way that people just get happy and scream in. Deep House was similar to many of the messages of freedom for the black community. Regional scenes, Detroit Sound, 1986 a Euro 1989. Detroit techno is an offshoot of Chicago house music. It was developed starting in the late 80s, one of the earliest hits being Big Fun by Inner City. Detroit techno developed as the legendary disc jockey The Electrifying Mojo conducted his own radio program at this time, influencing the fusion of eclectic sounds into the signature Detroit techno sound. This sound, also influenced by European electronica, Japanese technopop, early b-boy hip-hop and Italo disco, was further pioneered by Juan Atkins, Derek May, and Kevin Saunderson, the godfathers of Detroit techno. Derek May aka Mayday, and Thomas Barnett released Nude Photo in 1987 on May's label Transmat Records, which helped kickstart the Detroit techno music scene and was put in heavy rotation on Chicago's Hot Mix 5 radio DJ mix show and in many Chicago clubs. A year later, Transmat released what was to become one of techno and house music's classic anthems, the seminal track Strings of Life. Transmat Records went on to have many more successful releases such as 1988's Wiggin' as well. Derek May had successful releases on Coldcut Records and many remixes for a host of underground and mainstream recording artists. Kevin Saunderson's company KMS Records contributed many releases that were as much house music as they were techno. These tracks were well received in Chicago and played on Chicago radio and in clubs. Blake Baxter's 1986 recording, When We Used to Play / Work Your Body, 1987's Bounce Your Body to the Box, and Force Field, The Sound / How to Play Our Music, and The Groove That Won't Stop, and a remix of Grooving Without a Doubt. In 1988, as house music became more popular among general audiences, Kevin Saunderson's group Inner City with Paris Grey released the 1988 hits Big Fun and Good Life, which eventually were picked up by Virgin Records. Each EP/12-inch single sported remixes by Mike Hitman Wilson and Steve Silk Hurley of Chicago and Derek Mayday May and Juan Atkins of Detroit. In 1989, KMS had another hit release of Rock to the Beat, which was a theme in Chicago dance clubs. UK, 1986 early 1990s. With house music already massive on the 80s dance scene, it was only a matter of time before it would penetrate the UK pop charts. The record generally credited as the first house hit in the UK was Farley Jack Master Funk's Love Can't Turn Around, which reached number 10 in the UK singles chart in September 1986. In January 1987, Chicago artist Steve Silk Hurley's Jack Your Body reached number 1 in the UK, showing it was possible for house music to cross over. The same month also saw Ray's enter the top 20 with Jack the Groove, and several further house hits reached a top 10 that year. Stock Aitken Waterman's productions for Mel and Kim, including the number 1 hit Respectable, added elements of house to their previous Europop sound, and session group Mirage scored top 10 hits with Jack Mix 2, and Jack Mix 4, medleys of previous electro and Europop hits rearranged in a house style. Key labels in the rise of house music in the UK included Jack Tracks, which specialised in licensing US club hits for the British market, Rhythm King, which was set up as a hip-hop label but also issued house records, Jive Records Club Records imprint, the tour in March 1987 of Knuckles, Jefferson, Fingers Incorporated and Adonis as the DJ International Tour boosted house in the UK. Following the number 1 success of Mars Pump Up the Volume in October, the years 1987 to 1989 also saw UK acts like the Beatmasters, Crush, Coldcut, Yaz, Bon the Bass, S-Express, and Italy's Black Box opening the doors to a house music onslaught on the UK charts. Early British house music quickly set itself apart from the original Chicago house sound. Many of the early hits were based on sample montage, rap was often used for vocals, and humour was frequently an important element. The second best-selling British single of 1988 was an acid house record, The Coldcut produced The Only Way Is Up by Yaz. One of the early anthemic tunes, Promised Land by Joe Smooth, was covered and charted within a week by the Style Council. Europeans embraced house, and began booking legendary American house DJs to play at the big clubs, such as Ministry of Sound, whose resident, Justin Berkman brought in Larry Levin. The house scene in cities such as Birmingham, Leeds, Sheffield and London were also provided with many underground pirate radio stations and DJs alike, which helped bolster an already contagious, but otherwise ignored by the mainstream, music genre. The earliest and influential UK house and techno record labels such as Warp Records and Network Records helped introduce American and later Italian dance music to Britain, as well as promoting select UK dance music acts. But house was also being developed on Ibiza, although no house artists or labels were coming from this tiny island at the time. By the mid-1980s a distinct Balearic mix of house was discernible. Several clubs like Amnesia with DJ Alfredo were playing a mix of rock, pop, disco and house. These clubs, fueled by their distinctive sound and ecstasy, began to have an influence on the British scene. By late 1987, DJs like Trevor Fung, Paul Oakenfold and Danny Rampling were bringing the Ibiza sound to UK clubs like the Hacienda in Manchester, and in London clubs such as Schumann Southwark, Heaven, Future and Spectrum. In the US, the music was being developed to create a more sophisticated sound, moving beyond just drum loops and short samples. In Chicago, Marshall Jefferson had formed the house group 10 City Byron Burt, Byron Stingily and Herb Lawson, from Intensity. New York Euro-based performers such as Matteo and Martos and Blaze had slickly produced disco house tracks. In Detroit, a proto-techno music sound began to emerge with the recordings of Juan Atkins, Derek May and Kevin Saunderson. Atkins, a former member of Cybertron, released Model 500 No UFOs in 1985, which became a regional hit, followed by dozens of tracks on Transmat, Metroplex and Fragile. One of the most unusual was Strings of Life by Derek May, a darker, more intellectual strain of house. Techno Scratch was released by the Knights of the Turntable in 1984, which had a similar techno sound to Cybertron. The manager of the Factory nightclub, Tony Wilson, also promoted acid house culture on his weekly TV show. The Midlands also embraced the late 1980s house scene with illegal parties and more legal dance clubs such as the Hummingbird. U.S., late 1980s early 1990s. Back in America, the scene had still not progressed beyond a small number of clubs in Chicago, Detroit, Newark and New York City. However, many independent Chicago-based record labels were making appearances on the dance chart with their releases. In the UK, any house song released by a Chicago-based label was routinely considered a must-play at many clubs playing house music. Paradise Garage in New York City was still a top club. The emergence of Todd Terry, a pioneer of the genre, was important in America. His cover of Class Action's Larry Levin Mixed Weekend demonstrated the continuum from the underground disco to a new house sound with hip-hop influences evident in the quicker sampling and the more rugged bass line. In the late 1980s, New Groove Records prolonged, if not launched, the careers of G. Burrell and Reno Burrell, collectively known as Burrell, along with basically every relevant DJ and producer in the NY underground scene. The Burrells are responsible for the New York underground sound and are the undisputed champions of this style of house. Their 30-plus releases on this label alone seems to support that fact. In today's market, New Groove record releases like the Burrells enjoy a cult-like following, and mint vinyl can fetch $100 US or more in the open market. By the late 80s, house had moved west, particularly to San Francisco, Oakland, Los Angeles, Fresno, San Diego and Seattle. Los Angeles saw a huge explosion of underground raves and DJs, notably DJs Mark Wyatt and Billy Long, who spun at Jules Catch 1, the oldest dance club in America. In 1989, the LA-based, former EBN OZN singer-rapper Robert OZN started indie house label One Voice Records, releasing the Mike Hitman Wilson remix of Dada Nada's Haunted House, which garnered instant club and mix show radio play in Chicago, Detroit and New York as well as in the UK and France. The record shot up to number 5 on the Billboard Club chart, marking it as the first house record by a white artist to chart in the US. Dada Nada, the moniker for OZN's solo act, released in 1990, what has become a classic example of jazz-based deep house. The Frankie Knuckles and David Morales remix of Dada Nada's Deep Love, featuring OZN's lush, crooning vocals and muted trumpet improvisational solos, underscoring deep house's progression into a genre that integrated jazz and pop songwriting structures, a feature which continued to set it apart from acid house and techno. The early 1990s additionally saw the rise in mainstream U.S. popularity for house music. Pop recording artist Madonna released the house single Vogue in 1990, which became an international hit single and topped the U.S. charts. The single is credited as helping to bring house music mainstream. Influential gospel R&B influenced Alia's release Time Passes On in 1993, then later, Follow Me, which received radio airplay as well as being played in clubs. Another U.S. hit which received radio play was the single Time for the Percolator by Camare, which became the prototype of ghetto house subgenre. Camare started the Cajole and Relief labels. By the early 1990s, artists such as Camare himself, DJ Sneak, Glenn Underground and others did many recordings. The 1990s saw new Chicago house artists emerge such as DJ Funk, who operates a Chicago house record label called Dance Mania. Ghetto house and acid house were other house music styles that were also started in Chicago. Late 1980s are Euro 1990s. In Britain, further experiments in the genre boosted its appeal. House and rave clubs like Lakota and Cream emerged across Britain, hosting house and dance scene events. The chilling out concept developed in Britain with ambient house albums such as the KLF's Chill Out and Analog Bubble Bath by FX Twin. The God's Kitchen Superclub brand also began in the midst of the early 90s rave scene. After initially hosting small nights in Cambridge and Northampton, the associated events scaled up in Milton Keynes, Birmingham and Leeds. A new indie dance scene also emerged in the 90s. In New York, bands such as Dirty Light furthered house's international influence. Two distinctive tracks from this era were The Orb's Little Fluffy Clouds, and the Happy Mondays Road for Luck, which was transformed into a dance hit by Vince Clarke. In England, one of the few licensed venues, the Eclipse, attracted people from up and down the country as it was open until the early hours. The Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 1994 was a government attempt to ban large rave dance events featuring music with repetitive beats. There were a number of abortive Kill Bill demonstrations. The Spiral Tribe at Castle Morton was probably the nail in the coffin for illegal raves, and forced through the bill, which became law, in November 1994. The music continued to grow and change, as typified by Left Field with Release the Pressure, which introduced dub and reggae into the house sound, although Left Field had prior releases, such as Not Forgotten released in 1990 on Sheffield's Outer Rhythm Records. A new generation of clubs like Liverpool's Cream and the Ministry of Sound were open to provide a venue for more commercial sounds. Major record companies began to open superclubs promoting their own acts. These superclubs entered into sponsorship deals initially with fast food, soft drinks, and clothing companies. Flyers and clubs in Ibiza often sported many corporate logos. A new subgenre, Chicago Hard House, was developed by DJs such as Bad Boy Bill, DJ Linwood, DJ Irene, Richard Humpty Vision and DJ Henry, mixing elements of Chicago house, funky house and hard house together. Additionally, producers such as George Centeno, Darren Ramirez, and Martin O'Cairo would develop the Los Angeles hard house sound. Similar to gabber or hardcore techno from the Netherlands, this sound was often associated with the rebel culture of the time. These three producers are often considered ahead of their time since many of the sounds they engineered during the late 20th century became more prominent during the 21st century. Towards the end of the 1990s and into the 2000s, producers like Daft Punk, Stardust, Cassius, Saint Germain and DJ Falcon began producing a new sound out of Paris's house scene. Together, they laid the groundwork for what would be known as the French house movement. By combining the harder-edged yet soulful philosophy of Chicago house with the melodies of obscure funk, state-of-the-art production techniques and the sound of analog synthesizers, they began to create the standards that would shape all house music. 21st century, 2000s. Chicago Mayor Richard M. Daley proclaimed August 10, 2005 to be House Unity Day in Chicago, in celebration of the 21st anniversary of house music. The proclamation recognized Chicago as the original home of house music and that the music's original creators were inspired by the love of their city, with the dream that someday their music would spread a message of peace and unity throughout the world. DJs such as Frankie Knuckles, Marshall Jefferson, Paul Johnson and Mickey Oliver celebrated the proclamation at the Summer Dance Series, an event organized by Chicago's Department of Cultural Affairs. It was during this decade that vocal house became firmly established, both in the underground and as part of the pop market, and labels such as Defected Records, Roll and On were at the forefront of championing the emerging sound. In the mid-2000s, fusion genres such as electro house and fidget house emerged. This fusion is apparent in the crossover of musical styles by artists such as Dennis Ferrer and Booker Shade, with the former's production style having evolved from the New York soulful house scene and the latter's roots in techno. Numerous live performance events dedicated to house music were founded during the course of the decade, including Shambhala Music Festival and major industry-sponsored events like Miami's Winter Music Conference. The genre even gained popularity in the Middle East in cities such as Dubai and Abu Dhabi and at events like Fields. In the late 2000s, house witnessed renewed chart success thanks to acts such as Daft Punk, Dead May 5, Steve Aoki, Fed Legrand, Armand van Helden, and Dada Life. 2010s 2010 saw multiple new sounds in house music developed by numerous DJs. Sweden knew a prominence of snare-less Swedish progressive house with the emergence of Sebastian Ingrosso, Axwell, Steve Angello, Avicii, Alesso, etc. Netherlands brought together a concept of dirty Dutch, electro house subgenre characterized by very abrasive leads and darker arpeggios, with prominent DJs Chucky, Hardwell, Laidback Luke, Afrojack, R3 Hub, Bingo Players, Quintino, Alvaro, Cedric Gouvet, 2G, etc. Elsewhere, fusion genres derivative of 2000s progressive house returned to prominence, especially with the help of DJs Calvin Harris, Eric Prydz, Matt Zoe, Above and Beyond and Fonzierli in Europe, Dead May 5, Cascade, Steve Aoki, Porter Robinson and Wolfgang Gartner in the US and Canada. The growing popularity of such artists led to the emergence of electro house and progressive house sounds in popular music, such as singles Lady Gaga's Marry the Night, The Black Eyed Peas' The Best One Yet, and the will.i.am and Britney Spears' Scream and Shout. Big Room House found increasing popularity since 2010, particularly through international dance music festivals such as Tomorrowland, Ultra Music Festival, and Electric Daisy Carnival. In addition to these popular examples of house, there has also been a reunification of contemporary house and its roots. Many hip-hop and R&B artists also turn to house beats to add a mass appeal to the music they produce. Examples include Kelly Rowland's Love Takes Over feat. David Guetta, Rihanna's We Found Love feat. Calvin Harris and Kid Cudi's Memories also feat. David Guetta. See also, House Dance, List of house artists, styles of house music, list of electronic music genres, notes. Further reading, Bidder, Sean. Pump Up the Volume, A History of House Music, Macmillan. ISBN 0-7522-1986-3, Bidder, Sean. The Rough Guide to House Music, Rough Guides. ISBN 1-85828-432-5, Brewster, Bill, and Frank Broughton 2000 Last Night a DJ Saved My Life, The History of the Disc Jockey, Grove Press. ISBN 0-8021-3688-5 and in UK, 1999/2006, headline. Kai-Fi Concha 2000 You Better Work. Underground Dance Music in New York City. Middletown, Connecticut, Wesleyan University Press. ISBN 0-8195-6404-4, Hewitt, Michael. Music Theory for Computer Musicians. First ed. U.S. Cengage Learning, 2008. ISBN 978-59863-503-4, Kempster, Chris. History of House, Castle Communications. ISBN 1-86074-134-7, Mireille, Silcott. Rave America, New School Dancescapes, ECW Press. ISBN 1-55022-383-6, Reynolds, Simon. Energy Flash, A Journey Through Rave Music and Dance Culture, also released in US as Generation Ecstasia Into the World of Techno and Rave Culture, Rizza Corrado, Trani Marco, I Love the Nightlife Wax Production, 2010, Shapiro, P. Modulations, A History of Electronic Music, Throbbing Words on Sound, ISBN 1-891-024-06X. Snowman, Rick. The Dance Music Manual, Tools, Toys, and Techniques, a Euro 2nd edition, Chapter 11, House. Oxford, UK, Elsevier Press. PA 231, a Euro 249. Rietveld, Hillegom de See This Is Our House, House Music, Cultural Spaces and Technologies, Ashgate. ISBN 1-85742-242-2, external links, House Music at DMOZ, The History of House Housekeeping, Funky House DJs from the UK, excerpt taken from the book, What Kind of House Party Is This? History of House Music and Legal MP3 DJ Mixes.